Joker Folie is finally in theaters, and I think we'd all agree that most of us had this on our must see list for 2024. We've been waiting about a couple of years for this film, and there were a lot of expectations. Now, do they clear these expectations? No, this film does not clear the high expectations that we all might have had for it, me specifically. But I have to say, it's not all bad. This is a decent film because I can segregate what doesn't work for the film for me from what I really did like about the craftsmanship of the film. I don't hate it. There are so many parts of this film that I like. Let's talk about it. Joker Folie is not all bad. There are a lot of good reasons to like this film. I know that it has issues. It has problems, mainly the music, because there are musical numbers that disrupt the natural storytelling flow. So that's a big piece of why most people won't like it. It took me out of the film and distracted a lot of the story. There is a lot as it relates to the quality and craftsmanship of the film. It takes place in Gotham City, and it felt very vintage. The set design and the grittiness of the cinematography and that texture and the rigidness of Gotham City in the fall and winter, how frigid and cold and dark it feels in New York in the fall. That had a distinct quality that transported me into the story. So that way it felt so dimensional and deep. I think that the performance that Joaquin delivers was really good. It's very, very strong, especially the last few minutes. The very last scene was very powerful, and it made me understand why he couldn't go from this performance to the performance he pulled out of a couple of months ago. It makes sense in that respect. Listen, Teamsters on that. I'm with the people who work in the crew with that, but I can understand why it might not have been a good transition from him going from playing this, which had to have taken a lot of out of him mentally and physically, because he is very gaunt in this film. His performance is really, really good. And I felt like the first Joker, I had some compassion for him, for his character, because the journey of him getting to the point where he is a madman, we saw the origin story of what how it developed into his becoming such a madman. So in that one, I felt for him. I could understand some of his humanistic qualities. He was humanized in that way. Here, I feared him. I think the humanistic part of him was intentionally missing from this film. There's the distinction of him looked at as a martyr to his fans, stands, and a monster to the law and people who understand that what he did to these victims was horrible. The story in and of itself was good, but those abrupt musical numbers just stifled the story in such a way that the next beat you had to like restart emotionally, because this musical numbers don't didn't really flow with the story in a rhythmic way. They seem so adjunct in the larger story, and the songs are great. They're standards. They were good songs, but they didn't matter to the overall narrative of the story. That affected the movie a whole lot. Again, the cinematic quality was good. In the beginning, there was some shaky cam that was dizzy. I loved the camera angles. I love how the angle follows and finds the characters to get into the maniacalness of all of the story. The beginning sequence, the first, I'll say, 5 minutes of the film is very good. It's so ominous, and it continued somehow to show a continuation of the first Joker movie, how Arthur Fleck is ostracized because he's so different. And there's the scene where it is raining and the guardsmen have umbrellas, but he doesn't, because he doesn't deserve any level of humanity at this point. Now, this is not cohesive in any way to the first movie. And I do like the first Joker a whole lot better because that one seemed to have its own identity separate from the character that Heath Ledger brought to Batman. I feel like, or The Dark Knight, I'll say, I feel like isolated from all of the other interpretations of Joker, that Joaquin Phoenix had his own interpretation that was really great and deserving of an Oscar, which he won. This one, though, reflected his Joker and an amalgamation of Heath Ledger. There were points where I felt like the story was going psycho, like what Anthony Perkins does in Psycho. Like, this felt like it wasn't always the same Arthur Fleck. It seemed to be pulling from other stories with similar psychological maniacalness, psychological issues. I felt like a lot of that was happening in different scenes, especially in the courtroom scenes. What I also thought was great was the stunt choreography. The choreography in this film is very good. And I think Gaga and Joaquin Phoenix just had a rhythm to their choreography that stood out. It jumped out of the screen to me. The sound design is very good. There aren't necessarily jump scares, but there are bursts of sounds that caught me off guard that played a big role in reviving many of the scenes, especially the scenes that were abrupt and outside of Gotham, like these animated, dreamlike sequences with these musical numbers that really activated my attention, even though it was distracting. Now, there is some runtime fraud. This film was 2 hours and 18 minutes. There needed to be 30 minutes shaved down completely out of this film. 30 minutes at least was unnecessary. A lot of the scenes felt claustrophobic because a lot of the set pieces are repeated and recycled. So a lot of it was unnecessary. Like, there were literal smoke breaks in this film that I thought were unnecessary. Now, I think a big problem with this film is that a lot of us are watching Penguin, and that is also set in Gotham City. I think one of the major issues with Joker 2 isn't even about the movie, but could be about the fact that Max is currently streaming Penguin, and Oz, Penguin, is a DC villain that happens to be written better. We are simultaneously able to compare in real time these two villains, and Oz is written better. This iteration or continuation of Arthur Fleck is not written well. And I feel like when it comes to the legs, longevity of Joker 2, it's going to be compared to Penguin. If there is a cut where the musical numbers are taken out of the film, this would be a lot better. This was written and directed by Todd Phillips, and I feel like he wanted to make a point that he doesn't want to do any more of these films, and that seemed to be the point that was made. The film is stacked. The performances were spectacular. Lee Gill, Brandon Gleeson was a standout for me. Kathleen Keener, of course, Lady Gaga, and Joaquin Phoenix. But the absolute standout for me, which I was just mesmerized by his performance, was Harry Lottie as Harvey Dent. He was so good with the physicality. He just grabbed my attention in every scene, in every line of dialogue. I think he was a really good Harvey Dent. All in all, I don't think this is bad. I think this was actually decent if you take away the biggest piece would be to just remove those sequences that want it to be a musical. This is not a musical. Most of the songs are in Arthur Fleck's head, really. He is imagining them. They're dream sequences, but they're so distracting from the story that if they were removed, I think the story would flow a whole lot better. This is centered around Arthur Fleck, who has, in the last movie, had murdered 6 people, possibly more. He has to stand trial. He cannot plead insanity. The state is asking for the death penalty. And he either has to surrender to the fact that he is going to die and he is not immortal, or he's going to try to fight for his life because he's fallen in love. I can't say I hated this. It's okay because I can segregate what's so good about it from what hurts it a lot. At any rate, Joker Folie is currently in wide release in theaters now.